contrast to some of the outstanding people on the panel whose job it is to bring people into the city, our job is to take care of them once they arrive and make sure that they want to come back and that they enjoy their stay. That is a harder job than you might realize. Some people like hard beds, some people like soft beds, you know, so you know the story. But we love what we do. Our team is very capable and we enjoy it very much every day. The Hilton Universal has been doing this for over 30 years in their San Fernando Valley. Our company has actually owned this hotel for 27 plus years of those 30 years. We take pride in ensuring that visitors experience with us nothing short of the very best. Over the last several years, in order to stay competitive in the market, we have invested millions of dollars. Hopefully you've seen some of that as you walk through the building this morning, a new lounge, a new Cafe Sierra. The rooms are new. We're in the middle of our, kind of in a phase on this room. Our carpet did not arrive yet, but we have a few things on the wall and some features coming that are not finished, but we had to open for you this morning. The local hospitality industry is thriving. We operate at near capacity year-round and have witnessed firsthand how new attractions like the Wizarding World of Harry Potter at Universal Studios can add this demand for the local economy. Last year, Los Angeles County enjoyed 47.3 million visitors. That's a lot of heads and beds. And they came to Los Angeles County to see what we're all about. This number is projected to grow and rise by 2020 to 50 million, and we certainly need to be prepared to do our part. So in response to the Los Angeles Tourism and Convention Board, they have stressed the need for the region to add more hotel rooms. This is a challenging goal, but one that we must achieve, and not only to address the market demand, but in order to keep Los Angeles economy with great paying jobs. In the years leading up to the 2028 Olympics, we must be ready. It will be here before we know it. We must welcome the world once again to Los Angeles. All of us in the hospitality business are going to need to work hard and work together to ensure that we make their stay as pleasant as possible. On behalf of the entire Hilton Universal team, whom I love dearly, I'd like to thank Stuart and everyone at VICA for your tireless and passionate support to our industry and to the Valley businesses. Thank you very much. Now more than for 68 years, the Valley Industry and Commerce Association has been leading the advocacy for San Fernando Valley community, tirelessly advocating for the region's job creators. Since 1988, VICA has held its conference to bring together the area's business leaders, academics, and elected officials, and other key stakeholders to discuss solutions to better serve our business climate. I would like to introduce our moderator today for the first session, the presenting sponsor from Wells Fargo, Regional Bank President, Mr. Patrick Nygren. Let's welcome Patrick.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you so much, Mark. As Mark mentioned, my name is Patrick Nygren, and I am the new Regional Bank President for the San Fernando Valley at Wells Fargo Bank. As Wells Fargo continues to move forward, we want to continue to focus on the positive changes that we continue to undergo by strengthening our culture and holding our leaders accountable. By improving our business practice and our risk management, we continue to focus on change for the better. Initiatives that continue to highlight three focal points: alignment, simplicity, and consistency. These are all integral changes to the undergoing strength of building a stronger community bank. We have continually restructured our entire leadership focus around our leadership and retail bank, and across the country, and have chosen leaders that will continue to focus on the enhancement of strengthening our communities across the country. On behalf of more than 270,000 team members of Wells Fargo Bank, I can assure you we are going to get this right. Additionally, we are continually committed to the communities in which we serve. We rarely see a thriving bank in a community which is struggling. At Wells Fargo, we know that we are responsible for promoting the long-term economic growth and prosperity and the quality of life in each and every one of the markets in which we serve. But now, before we get started, I want to remind you all that there is a breakfast survey at your table. VICA asks that you complete this during your breakfast. This will give VICA a great opportunity to learn from all of you as well as how we continue to enhance your experience as we move forward into next year. So as we go through the event today, please take 1 to 2 minutes and ensure that you do fill it out and hand it in. As you know, the theme for our event this year is mapping our future, which is really what business people do every single day. Work hard to create jobs as we work hard to succeed, but what direction currently is our economy going? This event is one of the most premier events within Southern California region. By bringing together knowledgeable economists and business leaders, we are given information that will help prepare us for what the future may hold. Our speakers have prepared some important information for us. So first, let me start by introducing our economists very quickly, and then we will go ahead and get started. First, we have Eugenio Aleman, Director and Senior Economist for Wells Fargo. He will be giving us an overview of where our economy is going at a national level. Following Eugenio, we have Jeffrey Kravetz, our Regional Investment Director for the Private Client Reserve, a U.S. bank. He will be giving us an overview of where our economy is going within our state. And last, we have Fernando Guerrra, Ph.D., Director of the Thomas and Dorothy Leavy Center and the study of Los Angeles Loyola Marymount University with a focus on our local economy. So we're going to go ahead and get started first. I'm going to invite Eugenio Aleman up to the stage.
Good morning, how are you? Good morning. I know that you are eating and you shouldn't talk with your mouth full, but good morning, how are you? So I'm going to talk about the U.S. economy in general. I don't have that much time, so you know, we are almost a year from this cataclysmic event, the presidential elections in November 8th. And there has been lots of things that have happened. And I am going to talk, you know, the title of my presentation is the U.S. economy bracing for higher interest rates. I have had that title for 5 years. The only difference is that I used to have a question mark at the end. Now I no longer have a question mark because interest rates are going to continue to go up. At Wells Fargo, we still believe that the Federal Reserve is going to increase interest rates 25 basis points in December, and then we expect them to rise interest rates twice next year. They are still thinking that they can or that they will be able to raise interest rates 3 times. We think that they won't increase 3 times, just 2 times. So as I said before, lots of things have happened since November 8th. And my first slide shows one of these things that really, really changed the conversation in the U.S. For the U.S. economy. And this is consumer confidence. Consumer confidence skyrocketed after November 8th. Yes? And in order for consumers to consume, to be willing and able to consume, they need 2 things: income and good vibes about the future of the economy. And for now, or since November 8th, they have made things, or at least they think that things are going to get better. So this is very important for the growth rate of the U.S. economy. The second really thing that has changed is business expectations or business sentiment. And you can see this is impressive. I mean, businesses thought that Hillary was going to be president, and things really came down. And then when Mr. Trump won, businesses have become very positive about the future of the U.S. economy. Perhaps because of lower taxes, lower regulatory environment, but the fact of the matter is that businesses are very positive about the future that they see. And the third thing that has really changed is interest rates, or the expectations about the interest rates. Yes? If you can see, and I don't know if you are able to see very clearly, back in 2013, interest rates, the yield curve on the 10-year Treasury skyrocketed after the Federal Reserve chairman at that time, Bernanke, explained that they were going to start tapering monetary policy or quantitative easing. And interest rates surged. After that, interest rates came down back. But the same thing happened after November when Mr. Trump won the election. Interest rates surged, and now they have started to come down again because everybody knows that nothing happens in Washington. So markets are kind of taken aback by the inefficiencies in our country's capital. Let me show you this. This is I just want to make a joke, so this is what I use for my joke. This is the fiscal surplus or deficit of the federal government for the last 50 years. So you can see that we have not had a good run at the surplus over the last 50 years. The only period where we had a surplus was during the Clinton administration, which I call the best Republican administration in the history of the US. We had a surplus of about $300 billion. Then after Mr. Bush took over, we went to a deficit of $800 billion when he left. Then Mr. Obama came, the deficit went to $1.5 trillion. But when Mr. Obama left, the deficit was about $400 billion. Today, the deficit is back at $640 billion. And our expectation is that it is going to go back to $1+ trillion as a whole. And this assumes that nothing happens in Washington. So there's no changes to taxes, no changes to expenditures. And this is what we have. This is the Congressional Budget Office that estimates revenues and expenditures according to current law, if nothing happens in Washington. And you can see that the deficit is expected already to climb back into $1 trillion. And this is, again, if nothing happens in Washington. If we have lower taxes, and if we have an infrastructure expenditure bill that passes the US Senate and the chamber, then that deficit is going to skyrocket again. So why do I talk about this? Because I have a joke. Yes? So we have two political parties in the US, yes? Both like to spend money like crazy, yes? Is this clear? So the only difference is when it's time to pay back. Republicans don't want to pay taxes, period. Democrats want Republicans to pay taxes. So everybody wants to spend, nobody wants to pay. That is what where we are today. And that is why it is so difficult to conduct policy in Washington, D.C. So let me talk about the U.S. economy. The U.S. economy has been growing at about 2% since the recovery from the Great Recession. That is way down the rate of growth that we had before the Great Recession, which was 3.5%. So we are almost growing at about 1.5 percentage point lower than what we used to grow, yes? And since the elections, our forecast is that the US economy will continue to grow at about 2.5%. So not much change from the changes that consumers and businesses are looking at from the Trump administration. So what we are looking at is just the same slow growth that we have seen for the last 8.5 years. We still don't have a recession in our forecast. We forecast 2 years ahead, so we still have growth in 2018 and growth in 2019. If we are correct in our forecast, that means that this will be the longest lasting recovery in the history of the country. The longest recovery occurred during the 1990s, and it was 10 years long. We are already getting into the 9th year of this recovery. So if we are correct in our forecast for 2018 and 2019, that means that we are going to be in the middle of the longest recovery in the history of this country, which is not a small thing. One of the things that we are looking very, very closely is the consumer, because 70% of the US economy is consumer demand. And you can see that consumer demand has been growing at about 2.5 to 3% during the last several years. Our expectation is that consumers will continue to drive economic growth, but we are a little bit concerned with income. Income is not growing very fast. And unless we have a recovery in income, higher wages, higher salaries, we might actually grow less than 2.5% that we expect today. For now, what we are doing is dipping into savings. So we are spending all the money that we have been saving since the Great Recession, and we are using that to complement our income. But that is not a long-term sustainable strategy. Let me show you this. This was the longest expansion in employment in the history of the country. Employment became positive in October of 2010. And for the first time, September of this year, we had a negative number. Of course, this is very noisy, correct? This number is probably going to be revised. It was negative 33,000, but that was because of the hurricanes. So if we have a revision of this number to a positive number, that means that this will be still the longest expansion in employment in the history of the country. We lost 9 million jobs during the Great Recession. It took us more than 5 years to recover those 9 million jobs. This is the trade-off. In 2 years, we lose 9 million jobs. It takes more than 5 years to recover. So my question is, why are we hiring so many workers if we are not growing very fast? The answer to this is productivity is very low. Look at this. This is productivity for different periods of time in the US economy. The latest period is 2011 to 2017. Productivity growth is barely 0.5%. Compared to the productivity during the Great Recession, to almost 2.5% growth in productivity. What happens that productivity is so high during the recession? Well, everybody's afraid to be laid off, so everybody works harder. Yes? And at the same time, because people get laid off, we have to do more work, our work plus somebody else's work, correct? So that pushes productivity very high. But the second reason is that millennials, baby boomers are retiring en masse. The estimate is that 10,000 Americans retire per business day today. That puts the monthly number at about 230,000 Americans are retiring per month. Yes, we are hiring about 180,000 millennials, which are very low productivity. They just text the whole day. I'm just joking. I have 3 millennials, so I know what I'm saying. But this is what is happening. The most productive generation of the history of the country is retiring en masse. And the least productive is coming in at a very fast pace. I'm not saying that they are not workaholic or that they don't work, because my kids do work, but it will take some time for them to become as productive as those who are retiring today, yes? I mean, I know that President Trump says that there are 95 million Americans that cannot get a job. That is ludicrous, yes? If 95 million Americans cannot get a job, the unemployment rate will be about 60%. And we didn't have a 60% unemployment rate during the Great Depression. So who is he talking about? You know, the unemployment rate today is 4.2%. The lowest unemployment rate in history has been 3.8%. So we are 0.4 percentage points away from the lowest unemployment rate in history. Of course, he will say fake news, yes? But the news is this. Out of those 95 million people that presumably are looking for a job, 45 are not looking for a job. They are retired. They are not coming back. 15 million are disabled Americans, cannot work. 15 million are taking care of family members. They have better things to do than to get a cheap job, yes? And there are 22 million Americans that are in college, temporarily, hopefully, yes? But there's always 22 million people in college, hopefully not the same, Yes? So there's nobody available to work in the US economy. What we have to do is try to figure out how to increase productivity with the workers that we have. And no politician has been able to figure that out. But anyway, I don't have that much time. So employment is growing all over across the sectors with the exception of information. It's a very weird sector. It includes movies, newspapers, and IT, but it's a very weird sector. Unemployment rate, as I told you before, 4.2%, one of the lowest in history. There's nobody available to work in this country. If you have a college degree, you are more than fully employed. 2.3% is your unemployment rate. 4.9% is full employment. The only people available is those who do not have high school diplomas. Inflation is nowhere to be found, so this is not the reason why the Federal Reserve is trying to increase interest rates. It is just because they want to increase interest rates to be prepared to lower interest rates once we go into a recession. And let me tell you, we are going to go into a recession very, very soon. Interest rates are coming up, as you can see. The housing market continues to recover, and I am going fast because I don't have more time. Housing, it continues to recover, so that's not a big issue. Home prices are growing at about 6%. The manufacturing sector is booming. However, the manufacturing sector is only 14% of the US economy. 86% is services, and it's also booming. So the US economy is doing relatively well. Debt is coming down. Debt service is very, very low. And savings, this is what I said before, savings is very low, so you can see how we are doing in order to consume. So that said, we have 2.1% for this year growth, 2.4% for next year, and 2.5% for the following year. As a very good friend of mine says to me, every time that I explain something to him, he says, Eugenio, thank you very much for your explanation. I am still confused, but at a higher level. Thank you very much.
All right. Thanks for having me back. I'm going to talk about one of my favorite economies in the world, the California economy. And California is truly a leader in so many different sectors. We're talking about technology, healthcare, real estate, agriculture, entertainment, and that's just to name a few. So I'm going to dive right in and look at the California economy, where it is now and where it's headed. So my first slide, I would probably call this Life in the Fast Lane. This slide shows California as if it were its own country, stacked up against other countries in the world with regard to GDP or growth. So take a look. United States obviously is number one. Then about half of the United States GDP is China. Then we've got Japan, Germany, and the United Kingdom. Now, right now, California's GDP is actually a tad bit below the United Kingdom. So next year, if I do this presentation, California will probably be number 5 because California keeps growing, but the United Kingdom is having issues because they want to leave the European Union. California is so big that it contributes 14% of the GDP of the United States. So let's take a little closer look at California gross domestic product. And this looks a lot like a chart that we saw earlier. It does mirror the national average. And you can see that GDP did drop dramatically during the financial crisis and has rebounded nicely. Now, as our previous speaker said, you know, GDP growth is good, nothing sexy, nothing stellar, but it's getting the job done. It could be better, and he discussed some of those issues nationally, and they are reflected in California as well. Now, let's talk about the expansion here in California. The expansion is one of the longest on record. Now, this goes back to 1960, and the largest expansion was actually in the 60s, and that was 120 months. So the next biggest one was in the 90s before the internet bubble crashed, And now we're at 90 months of economic expansion. So the question is, can we keep going, right? Can the California economy, which is so innovative, keep growing and expanding? And we believe that the answer is yes, as long as the national economy is doing well and Californians continue to innovate. So here's the unemployment rate nationally and the California unemployment rate. Now, the big takeaway here is, why is the California unemployment rate 1% on average higher than the national average? You know, that doesn't really make sense, because I had the previous slides, and if California is such a dynamic economy, why is the unemployment rate higher? Well, it's simple. California is really two economies, right? And what I mean by that is California is the coastal economies. That's the Bay Area, LA, Orange County, and San Diego. And then the inland communities. And then those coastal communities have lower unemployment. Those economies tend to be more service, technology, or more innovative driven. And when you go inland into California, those economies can be more rural and more locally focused. So that's why you have that higher unemployment. So another thing you should know is that unemployment in California is very divergent. You know, in the Bay Area, it could be you know, almost under 3% because jobs are so tight there. But if you go inland, there are actually counties, about 10% of the counties in California have an unemployment rate of above 9%, right? And the highest are two, Colusa and Imperial, and the unemployment rate there is almost 20%. Now, another maybe dark statistic in these numbers is the poverty rate in California is actually quite high. It's 21%, and that's about 5 percentage points higher than the national average. So this growth and dynamicism in the economy does mask some other problems that are at the state level. Now, what about California employment by industry? So this shows California unemployment, and if you look at the top, those are the categories with the higher employment. So this is job growth. So total job growth is a little under 2%. So what's growing? Education and health services, that's growing. Leisure and hospitality. And one of the reasons why health services is growing is because all of us are aging, right? We're an aging population, and we need more health care. Now, the big grower in California is construction. Look at the bottom. Construction's growing at about 6%. And all of you in this room know that California real estate, especially along the coast, is really hot. It's spurring a lot of development, not only in commercial, but also residential. Now let's look at California job growth forecast. So where are the jobs going to be in the future? If you forecast out 7 years, where are the top growing jobs going to be? Now this has the job and also the average hourly earning. So the top two categories, which goes with construction, are brick masons and roofers. So the average there is about $26 an hour. And then the next two categories, software developers, applications, and web developers. So that category has a average salary of about $46 an hour, so much higher. And then at the bottom, you see the lowest is cooks and restaurant staff at about $12 an hour. So pretty big divergence there in growth as far as jobs. Okay, now let's talk about manufacturing. Our previous speaker said that the manufacturing sector, I think, is about 14% of the economy. It keeps going down, and this is California manufacturing jobs. And you can see that we started at about 2 million, and we're down to about 1.3 million. So where are all the jobs going? Obviously, they're going overseas to Asia, places like Mexico where labor is cheaper. But what's really interesting is despite the fact that not as many things are made here in California, A lot of things are actually designed here in California. So I'm going to talk about a company, it's called Qualcomm. And Qualcomm is a company it's headquartered in San Diego, and they design chips for wireless communication. So in your cell phone, there's a modem that receives and transmits data. And chances are almost 100% that that was designed by Qualcomm, a company which has about 130,000 patents. But they don't actually produce the chips here, they produce them overseas. So that's kind of a good example of what's happening. A lot of innovation, but not as many manufacturing jobs. Now, let's talk about home prices. This is a tough subject for Californians. This is the median California home price, and it goes back to 2005. You can see before the financial crisis, it was close to $600,000, right? And then at the bottom of the financial crisis, it got basically cut in half. And there's been a slow and steady growth back up. So we're almost to that pre-crisis level. And the issue with real estate or with housing in California is really one of supply, right? There's plenty of demand out there, but there's not enough supply. So that's driving up cost, not only to the consumer to actually rent or own, but there's also issues with driving up cost as far as labor to actually build new homes and build new multifamily structures. So I call this one Lifestyles of the Rich and Famous. So this shows where the California home prices are actually going up the most, or where the biggest demand is. And it's not on the lower end, because those lower end homes have already been purchased, and a lot of the big hedge funds and financial firms bought a lot of these medium and lower end homes. So where the growth is actually at the high end, the $1 million, the $2 million plus homes in California. Okay, another way to look at California is to look at the health of the economy through its debt, right? The previous speaker talked about debt for the United States. Well, California does have a lot of debt. So this is a slide of California long-term debt, $75 billion. And you might be surprised that half of that debt actually goes to K-12 education. And then other big categories would be transportation and also clean air and disaster recovery. So let's take a little closer look. And I'm a finance guy, so what I do is I look at spreads. Now, that's not something that you put on your In-N-Out burger, right? What I'm talking about here are credit spreads. That's the differential between California municipal debt and the national average, right? So when things were really bad in the recession, that spread or differential was about 1.5%. Now it's about 0.2%. This is a really good graph, okay? This means that it's cheaper for California to borrow now because the health of the economy has really improved since the financial crisis. Now, let's take a little closer look at California debt as it compares to other states in the United States. So these are the top states, their credit rating, and their debt as a percent of GDP, right? So top is Texas. Texas is AAA rated. Their debt as a percent of GDP is actually under 1%, which is pretty amazing. California, AA minus, which is actually a huge improvement since the financial crisis. Almost 4% debt to GDP, which is higher than the national average. So there's definitely some work to do with this regard. Now, when you look at the economy, small businesses are the backbone of the economy in the United States and also in California. And a great benchmark to look at is venture capital, new small businesses starting. So this is venture capital in California. And not only the deals, but also in billions, right? So California leads the nation in venture capital. 41% of all venture capital, it's done right here in California. And about a third of that is technology, okay? So Venture capital has been growing nicely since the recession. It's backed off a little bit, but still very healthy. All right, what about tourism? Tourism is a huge component of the California economy. And here we've got three pieces of data. We've got earnings, we've got total spending, and we've got employment. A dip around the recession, but a very good recovery. And as far as employment, it's about 1.1 million people. And there are about 265 million people every year visiting California. So the tourist economy here in California is thriving. It's alive and well, and there's no better place to talk about tourism than here in Universal City. Now, another chart here on California is where do people like to go visit when they come to California? So this chart has two pieces of data. I'm familiar with this area of California, and I'd like to visit this area of California. So as you can imagine, the top areas are Los Angeles County, San Francisco County, and San Diego County, mainly due to all the incredible attractions and also due to the great beaches in those areas. But there's other great areas in the state to visit, and that would be Orange County, the deserts, and the north and our central and south coast. So the California tourism economy continues to thrive. Now, this is actually my last slide, and I've done this talk a few years in a row, and I usually end talking about the drought. So maybe this year the title should have been Singing in the Rain, because we got so much precipitation. In fact, we actually got too much precipitation last year. So this talks about California agriculture with regard to employment. So the greener the area is, the more employment in agriculture in that region. So obviously the San Joaquin Valley is key. The San Joaquin Valley is about 2/3 of the fruits and nuts in the United States actually come from San Joaquin Valley. So that's a big area. Another big area is the wine growing region of California. And I'm going to talk a little bit about that. California agriculture in 2015 contributed $47 billion to the economy. So really a key part of the sector. And I was in Napa Valley a few weeks ago, and I was staying in my hotel, and I had just gotten there, and at 2 in the morning, I get this knock at the door, and they say, you have to evacuate because the fire's coming. And I walk out of the hotel, and I can see on the ridge, there's actually the flames that are coming up on top of the ridge. So this morning, I just want to give a big shout out to all the firefighters, all the emergency workers, and all the volunteers which have worked so diligently and actually risked their lives to help the people in those wine-growing areas of Sonoma and Napa. So, thanks. Yeah. So I just want to conclude by saying this. California is one of the most dynamic economies, not only in the United States, but in the world. But as I showed you, when you look under the hood of California, it's not so simple. Two economies kind of running parallel. And really the challenge for private sector and the challenge for government is to try to get those two economies, the coastal economy and the inland economy, growing at closer to the same rates. But regardless of what happens, California is always going to be a powerhouse and one of my favorite states in the United States. Thank you.
Thanks, Jeffrey. Fernando, Guerrra, Loyola Marymount University. I am not an economist. I am a political scientist, and I say that because, of course, I very much appreciate public service and encourage my students greatly to become public servants. And I'd like to just, because of that, give a shout out to Wendy Gruel, who's here. Wendy. And of course, when Eric Garcetti gets elected president in 2020, the mayoralty will be up again. So just to let you know. I also want to shout out to Audra Hoffman, who's a trustee. of the LA Community College Board, the largest community college board in the United States, and of course, Nicole Jones, who's on the Compton Community College Board and also one of my former colleagues at Loyola Marymount University. What I'm going to be talking about is the San Fernando Valley and public opinion and how Angelenos, and specifically Valley residents, feel about civic, social, cultural, political issues. But today I'll only be discussing the residents' opinion on the economy. How do you feel about the economy? In preparing for this, my staff prepared something like 80 slides. And I say that to you because we have a ton of data about the opinion of San Fernando Valley residents. And if you go to our website, which I'll put up later on, you can see some of that data. So very quickly, methodology, some conclusions, and then looking at some of the results. I'm speaking from a survey that we do annually at Loyola Marymount University, where it's the largest general social survey in metropolitan Los Angeles. It's actually the largest general social survey in urban America. No other urban area or major city has a survey this large. And I would like to thank Wells Fargo. They have been a sponsor of that survey for 3 of the last 4 years. In that, we also oversample certain areas, for instance, the San Fernando Valley. And that means we have over 400 residents that we survey in the San Fernando Valley for the last 4 years. It makes it the largest annual survey of the valley that we do every single year. And it's an amazing set of data for those of you who want to know how the valley residents are thinking. And then what I'm going to be talking about is constantly about San Fernando Valley only, San Fernando Valley compared to the rest of the city, the metro area, the city as a whole, sometimes the county as a whole, and sometimes the county excluding the city. And so that's why I want you to take a look at that. There are very different groups that we're talking about, and I'll try to make it as clear as possible when we're doing that. The conclusion. The LA region is incredibly optimistic, much more optimistic than the national setting, and much more optimistic than most other urban areas about the economy, about their cities, about a variety of, about city services, etc. San Fernando Valley is similarly optimistic. Jeffrey and I were talking about, I grew up in Highland Park, where Occidental College is located, where he went to, and back then, and even before that, the narrative was always that the valley was very different. It was different demographically, it was different in public opinion, it was different in partisanship, and that was somewhat true back in the 50s, 60s, 70s, even into the 80s. Today, there's hardly any difference. The San Fernando Valley and the rest of Los Angeles, what we call Metro LA, in terms of public opinion, are almost identical. In terms of partisanship, almost identical. In terms of demographics, almost identical. The distinction between the valley that we used to have is completely disappeared. And then third, while we are incredibly optimistic as a city, and specifically in the valley, there are still some challenges. Some of those challenges were already alluded to. Here, let me give you some results. We asked this question, how do you think things are going in Los Angeles region, in the right direction or wrong direction? What is great about this question, and I say it's a great question, I didn't write it, we've been asking, and when I say we, I mean we academics, economists, political scientists, social scientists who've been doing public opinion for decades have been asking this question for over 50 years in all kinds of settings, national, regional, etc. And we keep the wording very similar. And therefore, we can compare LA County residents or the Valley, et cetera, not only to each other as we do in this survey, but to the national results that, for instance, Pew does, or to the statewide results that the Public Policy Institute of California, or PPIC, does. And we have data from that same month. And so we can compare this, how LA residents are, to California residents, national residents, residents in Florida, Chicago, et cetera. On that basis, we can conclude, given these numbers, that LA residents are the most optimistic people. Now, what are the resources that we have for the economy? All kinds of different resources. But number one, of course, are people, residents. And I would argue that the more optimistic the residents, the greater the resource is. And so we have a tremendous resource in the valley. What about the direction in your city? And you can see, going back, you see that? We're talking about the region. We're basically talking about the LA County. And then when you go to the city, it's even higher, right? So Angelenos are even, and this was asked, when we're asking this question, we already know what city you live in. And so when this question is not only asked of LA City residents, but let's say Long Beach or Monrovia or what have you. And then we finally ask about your neighborhood. Look at that. Look how optimistic people are about their neighborhoods. They believe in their neighborhoods, especially the San Fernando Valley, right? 74% of residents. But look at LA County, not in the city of LA. 80% of residents in LA County are incredibly, incredibly satisfied with their neighborhood. They even recommend their neighborhoods for raising children. There's always this narrative about, hey, if you have children, you should leave LA. I don't have the slide here, but over 85% of LA City residents would recommend that you raise children in Los Angeles. Again, going against that narrative that sometimes the civic elite talk about, but when you ask residents, it's a very different picture. Do you believe the national economy will do much better, somewhat better? And you can see the data there. Let's compare that to how they believe LA County will do. And you can see that there's a little bit more about the national economy. I also want to remind you that this survey was done in January. We always do this survey throughout the month of January. And what was happening in January? We were having a headache or a hangover from the November results and didn't understand what was going to happen. And so it's clouded to some extent by that. How would you rate your own personal financial situation? And you can see that in terms of excellent, only 8% of Valley residents believe their financial situation is excellent. And you can see the results there. Sorry that I'm going through this quickly. Let me also just tell you that we have this exact same data for the Valley since 2014. 14, 15, 16, 17, this is the fourth year. We're going to do it again in 2018. All the data is available on our website where you can compare over the different years, all right? But you can see the sense there, and then we ask you about at the end of the year, do you expect your financial situation to improve? And look at that, how optimistic people are, that about 43% all the way to 47% in Metro LA believe their financial situation is going to improve. Even though they don't think it's excellent, but a good percentage think it's good, people are still optimistic about themselves and about what they can do. Okay, and it's that optimism that you heard Eugenio talk about, that drive. You need that. That's one of the main components for continuing the economic drive. Yes, you have to have income, but you also have to have that belief that you can do things. And we have that here in Los Angeles, especially in the Valley. We also, what's amazing about this is that, you know, we ask about upper class, middle class, lower class. And I would say that about 80% of the people who answer this question, because then we later on ask them, what is their income, what is their education? And so statistically, we could put them in a social class. And then we, of course, have census data where we can put them to the social class. And this almost relates exactly to what it is, except that about 20% people mislabel themselves. There are about 20% people who are in upper class and actually call themselves lower class. There are about 20% of the people who are actually in the lower class by our data, but put themselves in the upper class. But yet it washes out, it almost comes out exactly what it really is. Overall, how satisfied are you with the quality of services in your city? Only 1/5 of San Fernando Valley residents are dissatisfied. Oftentimes when you listen to certain people, read certain blogs, you would think that 90% of the Valley is dissatisfied with the city of LA and its services. Nothing could be further from the truth. And so that narrative that you get among some political activists, some neighborhood activists, that everybody hates the city in the Valley, couldn't be further from the truth when you actually ask Valley residents. Pretty satisfied with the city services. Can they improve? Absolutely. And we saw the DWP table out there. Others, we can all improve, okay? But that's pretty good data. Okay, we broke it down and asked about the DWP, asked about LAPD, et cetera. So we have all that data. So it's not just in general about city services. We actually asked about 20 different city services, and you can take a look at that on our website. Do you think the economic disparity between the rich and the poor will increase, stay the same, or decrease? Here's where we get to some challenges. Everything's been optimistic, but in this question, it shows you that we believe, as Angelenos, that things, in terms of the disparity, are going to get worse before they get better. We just don't believe in that equality that's been happening in terms of equity, and that to us, I think, is a major challenge, that we believe things are stacked against the poor and the middle class in general. And this is somewhat challenging. Another thing that's really challenging, it was already alluded to by Jeffrey in terms of housing and the housing issues that we have. We have all that big data. We have all that objective data that Jeffrey talked about. You know it's a crisis. People know it's a crisis. Do you think the majority of residents can afford to buy a home in your city or area? Okay, so when we're talking to San Fernando Valley residents, we're talking to them about the Valley. When we're talking to Compton residents, we're talking to them about Compton or Monrovia, about Monrovia or Pomona or what have you. And so it doesn't matter where you live in LA County. You don't believe that residents today would be able to afford that housing in that area, whether it's Compton, Beverly Hills, the Valley, Hermosa Beach, Long Beach, et cetera. And you can see that. That's a tremendous challenge, tremendous challenge. Not only do our housing prices out of control, we just don't believe we can even get to buying homes. Recently, and this is my Wendy Gruhl question, recently there has been discussion about whether current Los Angeles Mayor Eric Garcetti should run for president. Would you be supportive or not supportive of him running? All right? 64% of LA city residents support the mayor running, okay? And I did this because consistently over in terms of 20 years of doing focus groups or surveys, we constantly find that residents are incredibly supportive of their local elected officials seeking higher office. They feel that projects the power of that community. Again, the political talking heads, including myself, and others always say, oh, you can't run for higher office. People don't want you to run for higher office. They want you to take care of what's going on in home. Nothing could be further from the truth. We are actually very happy if you run for higher office, and we encourage you to run for higher office, right? And over 2/3 of LA County residents would support him running. That doesn't mean they're going to vote for him, okay? That's not the way the question was phrased. We just wanted to see if, you know, so when you see him start to run for higher office and people say, oh, you should be taking care of the home, et cetera, this shows you what is happening there. And I actually had no idea that this was on the slide presentation. One of my students must have just snuck that in there, okay? The other thing I wanted to talk to you about, I talked about the hangover that we had in January. President Clinton received over 2 million more votes in California than President Trump. In Los Angeles City and County, Trump only received 14 or 16%, depending on the region, okay? It's an incredible how democratic the state is, how even more democratic the county is, how even more democratic the city, including the valley is, all right? And part of that democratic issue is that there are no wedge issues in the Los Angeles region. And what do I mean by that? I took all the wedge issues nationally, where there are truly wedge issues from a national perspective, and when we ask at the local perspective, there's a major democratic, progressive regime that exists here that says, no, there's a consensus on all of this. So no elected official can run on any of these wedge issues because they're not going to work, right? Every single major candidate, Wendy Gruhl and Eric Garcetti, they agreed on all of this. Everybody running for governor, they agreed on all of these, okay? So therefore, what do elections become? Because they're not about any of these issues. And that becomes a little bit problematic for a state that is so dominated by one party that what issues do we talk about? And that's a challenge, all right? And let me see what else I have. I guess I'm just going to thank you and turn it over to the moderator, Patrick.
Thank you. Now we'll take this as a time for any questions that the audience may have. But as we think about your questions and we get our mics out, I do have a question that I would like to ask. So typically economic growth and political stability is kind of usually deeply interconnected. Yet here we are in a very unstable political environment, yet our stock market is continue off the charts. What's going on?
To me?
Who wants to take it?
I think what is going on is that businesses think that they're going to get lower taxes. Individuals are going to get lower taxes. And regulatory environment is going to weaken. So all those things, I think, that help confidence numbers and confidence views of the economy. And you know, the economy hasn't grown very, very fast over the last 8.5 years. So there is no sector that could take down the economy right now. So people are just positive about the future. And the markets are enjoying it. And there's a lot of money out there. The Federal Reserve has liquefied this economy for many, many years, and they are starting to dry these excessive money flows. But there's still plenty of money chasing very, very low returns, and that makes the stock market a bit over the edge. So that's my...
Yeah, let me answer that as a political scientist. Everything about this presidency is unusual. We all know that, right? And one of the things is his approval rating has declined dramatically. He's in the low 30s. We have never, as political scientists tracking this, seen this happen to a president in an era of economic growth, income growth, job growth, interest rates being low, the stock market taking off. Granted, all those are at lower levels, but it's still in this new normal. It is economic growth, it is job growth, it is income growth. Never have we seen this where you have all those positives on those indicators and the approval rating of the president has tremendously declined. Can you imagine what's going to happen when those do begin to change? I think Eugenio said that we have a recession coming very soon. I hope he's wrong. Let's not invite him anymore.
Yeah.
But if that does happen, you could imagine what his approval ratings are going to be.
Okay, I just want to make one comment as an investment advisor working with clients. This frustrates them a lot because they see that the politics seems to be dysfunctional in Washington. Nothing's getting done, but capital markets are roaring ahead. So why is that? So there's really two reasons. Right now, if you look at global economies, there's a global synchronized recovery which is happening. It's very rare to get all major economies of the world moving at once. So it's the United States, it's Europe, it's Asia, all moving positively. But here in the United States, which is the home for a lot of capital, low interest rates, low inflation, strong consumer sentiment, and what really drives the stock market is earnings. So investors are focused on that. And then, you know, Eugenio said that there's a lot of cash out there looking for a home. So as long as those fundamentals are still intact, investors are going to drive prices of risk assets up, and they will ignore what's happening in Washington. Now, if we do get meaningful tax reform, that would probably be a catalyst for markets to actually move higher because expectations are actually very low for Washington to get anything done.
Thank you. Any questions from the audience?
I have a question for Fernando. Did you ask how do Californians or the Valley citizens feel about taxes?
Yes, we did, and I have it here, but...
Because they fill my ear saying that they hate the taxes here.
Yeah.
That's the only thing that they hate.
So, I mean, I have colleagues who are Marxist who hate taxes. So, yes, everybody, it goes back to your whole statement, nobody wants to pay. However, I will say that Angelenos have been incredibly supportive of increasing taxes. Let's take a look at June. Last November, almost a year ago, what did we do? We increased our taxes by over $140 billion for the MTA. We increased our taxes over $3.2 billion for the LACCD. If you collect all the other school board bonds that were on the ballot in June in the county, that was another $5 billion that we increased our taxes. And so while we don't like to pay, when asked civically, should we increase our taxes to do a civic good, Angelenos have been at the forefront of saying yes. And many of these were at the 6.7%. Remember, the MTA at Measure M needed 67%. It got over 70%. And all those school bonds, while they only needed 55%, all of them but 2, and I think they were like 12 or 14, got over 67%. They were way above what they needed in terms of the support. So yes, we don't like to pay taxes, but when asked as a community, we're out, Angelinos especially. There's a question.
Thank you.
Question over here?
Steward, can they have access to these PowerPoints? Yes. Okay, so he'll make sure. If not, we'll make sure we'll put ours up at LMU.
There's another question.
Another question?
I have a question and maybe I misunderstood. You said that you sampled 400 people in the valley, is that correct?
Actually, 445, but we always make sure that there's over 400, correct?
That seems like a pretty small sampling, just out of curiosity.
No, not at all. We sample just in California. Many of the polls that you will see about California only have 400. And so that with 400, you get an error margin of 3.5%. And so most campaigns that are trying to elect people, they only do surveys of 400. Many national surveys that you see are of about 1,500. Our sample is way over. That's why it is the largest by far. So for instance, the Public Policy Institute of California, probably one of the most prestigious polling organizations. And when they do their statewide sampling, they do 1,700. Again, we're doing 2,500 in LA County. 400 is a more than significant survey, and the vast majority of surveys done in America are at about 400.
I mean, it is supposed to be a representative sample. So if those 400 individuals or households have the same characteristics as the population, then it is a good.
We have a question here.
Mine is kind of a follow-up to that. How about the sampling? Did you have some of those baby boomers, some youthful people? How did that work?
Sure. No, absolutely. What's very easy to do here is we know by the census what the exact makeup is of the valley, right? And so when we do a survey, most of our respondents will be very close to that. If not, there may be 3 or 4 points up for baby boomers or the elderly. We weight accordingly. By the way, the methodology to all of this is on our website. We are part of what we call the Transparency Initiative, the Association of Public Opinion Polling. We give all of our data out to anybody who wants it, and you can double check it, replicate it, etc. But we show you exactly how we select the people. We do it by phone, we do it by cell phone and landline, and then we also do a portion online to try to get more millennials, but we double check everything. And again, if you're really interested in this methodology, there's a whole tutorial on how we do it on our website.
Question down here.
So there are about midterm elections. It's going to be again a Democratic landslide. I do predict that no Republican in California will win a statewide election. Okay, that's an easy prediction because none has done it in the last 16 years. All right? And you can even go back to Arnold Schwarzenegger. He only won a special election in '03 and then a re-election. In terms of a new Republican actually winning, putting on the ballot, it hasn't happened since the 1990s. Okay, that's how democratic we are. Okay, and so what you have is 10 statewide elected officials, right? In December of 2003, of the 10 statewide elected officials, there was 1 person of color, and that was John Chung, who was then controller. Today, of the 10, there are 5 people of color, and I predict that at the end of the November election, it will either be 7 and possibly all 10. Okay, that's showing a tremendous. We've already had the partisan shift from Republican to Democrat. Now we're seeing the increasing ethnic shift in elected office holding at the statewide level.
Yes, back here.
Fernando, your presentation made clear that the city of LA and the Valley are more like ever before.
yes, there are, and I'm sorry I don't have, there are, I would say we ask over 100 questions on this survey, okay? I would say out of the 100, there are probably 4 or 5 where there's as much as a 10-point difference, but for the life of me, I can't recall. I've already had too much coffee, and so Kobe, I will be able to get that to you guys, and I'll send it to Stuart as well.
Question down here.
Yes, I have a question for Jeffrey. Just regarding California housing, if there is a recession that's coming, do you feel like the housing is going to go down in those areas where it's significant at $1 million and $2 million?
Yeah, that's a good question. If there is a recession, how's that going to impact housing? Because right now, housing is so tight and so expensive. So, you know, as you saw in the last recession was kind of the big kahuna of recessions. I mean, it took housing prices down. I think it was almost 50%. So you're right. Housing prices could go down. What could cool housing, the boom in housing, is actually interest rates. So interest rates are really low now, right? So the 10-year U.S. Treasury is 2.3%. As interest rates are going to go up, if there's more inflation, that's going to push rates up. And higher rates are not necessarily good for developers. They like to borrow at low rates and be able to do development and make some money. So I think you're right. If we do see a recession, you could see home prices go down, but we don't anticipate they'll go down anywhere to the extent they did in the Great Recession. That was kind of a once-in-a-lifetime event. So I think California is on pretty good footing now with regard to housing. And as I mentioned, really the issue is supply, right? There's just not a lot of supply coming on, and that's for a variety of reasons, you know, from market to market.
Let me add a little bit. This expansion in the housing market in California and almost all across the U.S. is very different than the 2006 to 2008. There is no supply, as he says. So the increase in prices is what normally happens when you have too many people trying to buy too few goods. So there is a big difference between the Great Recession and today. And second, I mean, I said that a recession is coming because on average, we have a recession between 7 and 8 years, correct? So we are already ahead of 8 years and a half. So the biggest issue is which sector is going to get us into a recession. And today, there is no sector that is so out of whack that could take us. I mean, there is a tweeter can take us there, yes? A really bad tweet, or getting out of NAFTA, or something that really shocks the market, or little Rocket Man getting more crazy. So there are things that could happen that could topple this economy, but for now we don't see any sign that is going to happen.
Thank you. So that's all the time we have for questions today, but let's give this opportunity for a big round of applause for all the
Thanks. That's great, man. Great job. It's good. Learned a lot.
We want to thank all of you again for joining us this morning. You know, Wells Fargo is proud to be a presenting sponsor with this event along with Southern California Gas. I want to thank also our breakfast sponsors one more time, U.S. Bank and the Hilton Universal City.
All right.
Before you please get up and get away, there are a few housekeeping items we want to make sure you know about today. Again, our breakfast sessions will begin promptly at 9:30, so you have roughly 15 minutes to visit some of our amazing exhibits out in the foyer. I encourage all of you to visit all of the exhibits. Also bring your bingo card. As Mark let you know at the beginning of the program, there is also the exit survey at your seats. If you please could again take a few minutes to fill those out and provide them to one of the VICA support staff or the registration table. And also a reminder, if you complete your bingo card, there are some great giveaways as well today. A chance of winning one of 2 round-trip companion airline tickets on Southwest Airlines, tickets to Six Flags Magic Mountain, a fan pack to the NFC leading LA Rams, including a signed football game, signed football and tickets to the game. I know I will be personally visiting a lot of these booths. There's also a raffle just for showing up today, including its Stonefire Grill, Dickey's gift certificate, tickets to the Kirk Douglas Theater, and cookies from New Horizons. Please, again, make sure that if you have not done so, please check in at registration. And again, one more time, a big round of applause for all your participants today. Thank you all. Again, the next events will start promptly at 9:30.